I want to introduce another gentleman, again, long history in the Hurricane WatchNet, long history in emergency communications, in Skywarn, has overcome some very interesting health struggles over the years that I'm impressed at how much he can do and is a role model there as well. And we has really forged a really good partnership between his net, the Hurricane WatchNet, and our net, the VoIP Hurricane Net. So I'd like to introduce KB5HAV, Bobby Graves, to talk about the Hurricane WatchNet.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here again back in New Orleans. And I tell you, I just love the hospitality down here and all the good food we got to eat out with everyone at the local club last night. It was real good. I ate way too much. That was a lot of food on the plate. As Rob mentioned, I've been with the Hurricane WatchNet for quite a long time, almost it seemed like coming up on 20 years now. I first joined the net back in 2000. I was almost immediately named webmaster of our website, hwn.org, and have brought our website through numerous changes, and it's about time to have another big upgrade to it. I served as assistant net manager from 2002 to 2006. Had to take a little break away from the net for a few years for some health reasons, and was named net manager back in 2013, and I still hold that position today, and I'm feel honored to be able to fill that role. Our net started back in 1965 on Labor Day weekend. It was created by Jerry Murphy, KYUW. Back then he was licensed as K1 NAP when he was stationed up in Rhode Island when he was in the Navy. Well, during that time he was working on the Intercontinental Amateur Radio Traffic Net, which back in those days operated on 14320. Well, there's a lot of people asking about this storm named Betsy that was heading towards that area. And it was began to disrupt the normal flow of that particular net. So Jerry asked the net manager if he could move everyone that was interested in Betsy up to 14325. Net manager agreed that would be a good thing to do, so Jerry did that. Well, there was a lady who was down in Panama that followed him up on 14325, and together they began the flow of traffic to help answer the questions of what was going on with this storm named Betsy. And thankfully, with some local hams here in the Miami area, was able to get them the latest advisories. They were then able to read that out to those in the Bahamas. They got to thinking, it's one thing to get the advisories out, but, and the forecasters would probably like to have the latest, ground surface data. So they started collecting data and started forwarding on back into the Hurricane Center. And quickly, that became known as the Hurricane WatchNet and the inaugural net. Later on, Betsy went ahead across the Bahamas, went into the Florida Keys, and then, of course, came here into the New Orleans area back in 1965 on Labor Day weekend. And the damage alone for that one storm was over $1 billion. And at that time, it was the first storm to create that amount of damage and earned it the name Billion Dollar Betsy. The net quickly formed a direct working relationship with the National Hurricane Center in Miami. In 2014, we gained a formal direct working relationship with the Canadian Hurricane Center. That was the first time I ever met Bob Robichaud, and he was presenting about the Canadian Hurricane Center, and I thought, there's Canadian Hurricane Center? We need to work together. And we quickly formed an alliance, and not knowing within just a few months later, we would be working Hurricane Arthur, which hit the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and then went straight towards Halifax, Nova Scotia. And through that one net, we linked them up through our chat room to the National Hurricane Center and let the forecasters talk. And I think even through the VoIP net did the same thing as well. So got a chance to try out a lot of those technologies there as well. And since then, we've been working very closely. And since 1965, we've been active for every Atlantic Basin hurricane, including a few tropical storms. Mainly the reason they were forecast to become a hurricane prior to landfall, or it was at the special request of the forecasters in the National Hurricane Center. And we've even worked a few hurricanes in the Eastern Pacific. This last time I think we worked one of those was back in 2003 when there was a storm hitting in the Baja California area. Unlike most organizations where you may have a single point of home port, I guess you could say, Say like with your local Skywarn program, you have your group that meets there at the National Weather Service or at a local EOC. Well, the Hurricane Watch Net, we're a little bit different. We have a group that's about 50 people strong. We're scattered across 20 U.S. states, 9 countries. And 14 of our people are fully bilingual. We've been recruiting bilingual people to help those that speak Spanish only or may feel more comfortable speaking Spanish. Back when I was assistant manager back in 2002, I got to realizing we don't have any members that speak Spanish. So I started impressing upon our net manager at that time we need to start recruiting some Spanish-speaking people because for the most part, if we needed some bilingual help, we had to call on the air, hey, does anybody speak Spanish? And one time in the chat room, Julio said, I'm here to help. So then we kept him busy. I said, Julio, we've got to get you some help. And we've been working very hard to help in that area, and it helped out quite a bit. And we do have a few of our members indicated by those yellow dots. They've been with us for over 20 years. We have 2 members who've been with us for over 35, actually 3 members have been with us for more than 35 years. One of them being Jerry Murphy, KYUW. He's been with us for all 54 years. And then we've got Tony, VP9NI out on, I can't believe I messed his call up, VP9HK there in Bermuda. And then Terry, W6LMJ, he's been with us for 35 years. Hard to find people that will stay with an organization that long. The mission of the Hurricane Watch Net is to disseminate advisory information. As mentioned earlier, we are now in the 21st century. We've got a lot of new high-tech technology. Hey, I got my cell phone here. I can get anything you want to find about weather, satellite imagery, whatever you want to have, until cell service goes down. Then where are you going to find your information? Have a tough time. I'll hit more on that in just a few moments. But we read that information primarily for mariners because they may be bouncing around at sea, it may be close to the storm. They may be used to trying to use their sat phone to get the latest advisories. Well, when there's a big storm and you're bouncing around, you're not going to get a good satellite signal. You may be trying to tune in that frequency that you may know where you can get weather. But if you know these are the frequencies we can come to, we know we can get the latest advisories, or if I find myself in an emergency situation, we know there's a group of folks there that can give us the help we need when we need it. Not only are we there to get out the latest advisories, but we're also there to collect the latest surface reports, ground truth data, if you will. You know, it's one thing to get the information out, but like Ken Graham mentioned earlier, they need the data. I mean, you got to consider, we've come a long way with technologies. The very first stationary satellite that the forecasters had to go into use didn't come along until 1975. That was 10 years after the Hurricane Watch Net was born. And it gave good information, but, you know, it was slow on updating. I think every image was 30 minutes old when you saw it. The newest ones we got with the latest GOES 16, which is now GOES East, updates every 30 seconds. And it's high definition, high quality information. But consider, the forecasters are trying to give you information of a forecast that's happening at the surface. That satellite's orbiting the Earth at 22,000 miles. We've got the hurricane hunters that fly into the storms to try to figure out what's going on at the surface, but they're flying into storms at anywhere between 20,000, 40, or even 60,000 feet, trying to figure out what's going on at the surface. Doppler radar has come a long way since the 90s. The new software packages are able to get in there to see what's going on, not only with the wind, but the rainfall, hail damage, things of that nature. But it scanned the atmosphere up around 20, 30, 40, all the way up to 60,000 feet, trying to figure out what's going on at the surface. You as storm spotters, ground stations, you're already at the ground. Any data you give is going to be food for that meteorologist. He's going to be like an appetite. Hey, yeah, give it to me. Because they want that data, because they don't have to worry about trying to figure out and calculate from those other instruments what's going on at the surface, because you've already got the instruments. You're already telling them this is what's going on. So your data is very, very important. Not only is ground truth observations important, but also that of to relay initial damage assessments. Damage assessments goes a long ways. It can help that the meteorologist and forecaster realize, this storm is a lot worse than it is according to this damage. Or maybe the storm is going a little bit different direction according to the damage being reported, or possibly that of storm surge that you're reporting in. We also function as a backup communications link not only for the hurricane centers, but also for the Coastal National Weather Service offices, the Canadian Hurricane Center, emergency storm shelters, and also working with non-governmental agencies and also the military to help provide relief before, during, and after any hurricane event. Over the years, from time to time, we've been blessed to be able to have the opportunity to actually talk to some of the Hurricane Hunter aircraft and the pilots on board, either from the United States Air Force or either the NOAA Hurricane Hunters. I had a pleasure to talk to one from the NOAA Hurricane Hunters back in the early 2000s, Captain Dave Tennyson. And that's the first thing I ever did. Once he got airborne, he'd always check in with us, do a comm check. And then I remember one storm he was going in. His responsibility on that one, I forget the name of the storm, but his was to actually go on the perimeter of the storm to see what the winds were doing and what the surf was doing. And he said, Bobby, I can't get back to the center, but report this in. This is a much bigger storm. He's having to actually climb to a higher altitude because he could not maintain that level where he was flying. It was just too rough. So he said, we got something bigger coming. Our net activation policy is generally whenever a hurricane is within 300 miles of landfall. However, that could vary on a few things such as forward speed and storm intensity. Let's go back a few years when we had Hurricane Matthew, when it was just right off the coast of Nicaragua and Colombia as a Category 5 hurricane. Well, that storm sat there and stalled for about a day, just sitting there just churning along. It was well within 300 miles of landfall of Nicaragua and Colombia. It was actually within 300 miles of landfall of even Haiti. But why activate for, how many hours, possibly days, for a storm that's just sitting there doing nothing? But when it finally made that turn to the north, started heading to Haiti, we were on the air and we didn't stop until it was downgraded. When we do activate, we'll activate on our primary frequency of 14.325. But since solar activity has been, let's say, non-existent, propagation on 20 has let's just face it, it's not there. Used to be I would like to say in the heydays from, seemed like about late 80s on up to early mid 2000s, you could talk on 20 meters 24/7 just about anywhere you wanted. But it seemed like since 2010, an hour after daylight and right at sundown locally, that's all you're going to get. You might get some sporadic propagation on 20, maybe if there may be a geomagnetic storm going on, maybe a rare flare maybe pop up. After the main radiation of that solar flares died down, you may get some good propagation, but right now it's not been there. So to help keep data coming in, when I became net manager, we had already tried over a few years prior operating on 40 meters, but I said, we can't shut down even on 20 meters at nighttime when we have a landfalling hurricane. It just doesn't make sense. So I made our net policy in 2013 that when we activate, we're on the air 24/7 until no longer needed. So we'll operate on during the daytime on 20 meters. At nighttime, we'll operate on 7268. When needed, we'll operate on both of them simultaneously. Here lately, we've been having to operate on both of them simultaneously. And of course, area coverage is the entire Caribbean Sea, Central America, Eastern Mexico, Eastern Canada, East and Gulf Coast states of the United States. Prior to any net activation, of course, we always alert the daily users of 14.325 and 7268. And we alert numerous other organizations, including the International Boat Watch Net. That's an organization that I started working with and actually doing their website about a year ago now. And with this organization, they work very closely with the United States Coast Guard, rescue coordination centers around the world. Also work very closely with a lot of folks that are tied into WindLink, and we can very quickly reach hundreds, if not thousands, of mariners, whether they're amateur radio operators or even commercial operators, and at least let them know, well, we're getting ready to activate. If you want to find some of the latest information, or even if you find yourself in an emergency situation, they know where they can come and get that information. We also work very closely with the Amateur Radio Relay League. Through their networks, they can get out our information to all the members very, very quickly. We've been working very closely for the past number of years with MARS, specifically U.S. Army MARS. And of course, we've been working ever since Saturn came in operation back in 1988. And of course, we work closely with FEMA. Primarily, they do have a station, the office there at the National Hurricane Center. And with all these groups, like with Army MARS, we have to provide them with enhanced situational awareness so they know what's going on and be able to, depending on the strength of the storm, where it's at and what have you, to be ready for humanitarian aid after the storm. And close also working with the American Red Cross, and we alert numerous amateur radio news outlets. Since day one, when the Hurricane Center had this first radio station there, back in those days, they worked as W4 EHW, Early Hurricane Watch. And then they upgraded that call sign back in 04 to WX4NAC, but we always been working closely with them. And since I've been part of the Hurricane Net, I've been working closely with Rob in the VOIP net. And of course, we always try to activate prior to WX4NAC coming online, because we like to try to get a lot of reporting stations lined up on the air to know what their capabilities are, whether if the weather data they have coming to us will be measured or estimated. We always love measured, but we will take estimated weather as well. Since 2014, our net has been busy. 2013 was one of only 2 other times that we never had to worry about activating for a landfalling hurricane. 2013 we did activate, but it was for a storm that ended up going into, I believe it was Veracruz, Mexico. But we activated for maybe like 4 hours, and it just never did upgrade to a hurricane, and we closed down. But since, we have not only been busy, but half the storms we've worked have been major hurricanes, Category 3 or higher. And the volunteers we have, they have been, they have given their life. You figure over the past, since 2014, they put in over 5,500 man hours of volunteer time. That's a lot of time. One rarity I've thought about was a couple years ago, we worked not 1 hurricane, not 2, but 3 hurricanes at the same time. I started looking back through our net's history. We had never worked 2 hurricanes at once, much less 3. But we were working Irma as it come across Barbuda, totally wiped out that little island. What few people survived the storm once they were evacuated. That was the first time in over 300 years that island was totally uninhabited. But as the storm was heading towards Puerto Rico, well, we had this other storm named Katia popped up there in the Gulf of Mexico. And right on the heels of Irma was Jose, and it went right towards Barbuda. Thankfully, it curved north. They got some heavy winds there in Barbuda, but still, it was like insult to injury. Not knowing a week later you're going to have Maria on the heels of all that, but still, I thought that was an amazing shot there. 3 hurricanes all together. As mentioned earlier, the sun has not been very kind to us. This solar cycle we're in, it seems like we've been at the bottom end of the solar cycle for a decade or better, and it doesn't look like it's going to be getting any better soon. I read on spaceweather.com the other day, they're thinking that we may start getting some better propagation in the next year or 2, and this next solar cycle peaking around the year 2023. But normally, the shot you see over on the right-hand side of the screen, that's normally what we're looking at with the sun right now. No spots at all. That means very poor propagation. When you start getting the sunspots like you see on the left-hand side of the screen, those are good for creating solar flares. Those are both good and bad. When a solar flare happens, you're going to get some HF blackouts. But when that blackout clears up, you've got some good propagation. Well, back in 2017, when we're working Hurricane Irma, as it's approaching Puerto Rico, big sunspot appears. And all of a sudden, while we're trying to get data coming in out of Puerto Rico and St. Thomas and all the Virgin Islands, kaboom. one of the biggest solar flares to happen in over a decade. It was ranked at a class X 9.3. And when that solar flare erupted, anything in the HF spectrum, you couldn't hear nobody for 4 solid hours. I don't care if they were sitting across the street from you with a 6-element beam and running full legal power, you weren't going to hear them. When it started clearing up, it was like some little noise starting to get back on the frequency, and then you barely start hearing people. A few days later, as the storm was trying to come in towards the southern tip of Florida, it popped off another flare. That time, not quite as strong, class X 8.2, it lasted for about 2 hours. But it's heartbreaking to know people are there needing you, and you're trying to get information from them that they need to give them the help they need. It's like you're handcuffed because you're there to help, but Mother Nature is just not working with you. I won't go into great detail of the storms we worked last year. Bob Robichaud covered that very well, as well as Julio. But suffice to say, we did activate our net 3 times last year for 3 different hurricanes. First one was for Florence. We stayed active for a total of 38 hours. But this storm was a long track storm all the way from Africa, just south of Bermuda before it finally slammed into the Carolinas. It went to a Category 4 hurricane twice. And in the meantime, in the middle of those 2 Cat 4s, it weakened to a tropical storm. But as it approached the Outer Banks, South Carolina, it reminded me of Sandy back in 2012. It just started coming to a halt and just drifted in. This is a shot of Florence when it was a Cat 4. I'm not sure whether I think it was the last time it became a Cat 4. But take a look at this one. It reminds me of Sandy. Just look at the size of the overall storm. It's covering just the entire East Coast from the Carolinas all the way up into New England. So that one, it just stalled and, of course, dumped a lot of rain. And, of course, the storm surge was tough. The following, not long after, we had Gordon. That was a tropical storm we activated for. There again, it was forecast to become a hurricane prior to landfall. It just never did do it. And when we saw it wasn't going to become a hurricane, we shut down operations. And then it wasn't long, we had the big one. That was Michael. With Michael, of course, when it made landfall, at the time it was considered to be a Category 4 hurricane with a maximum sustained winds of 155 miles an hour. It's like 1 mile per hour being a Cat 5. Of course, this past Friday, with the data they've been able to accumulate, like they did in '92, with Andrew, they were able to determine, yes, this was indeed a Category 5 hurricane. And we were on the air not for very long. The storm moved in quite quickly. We were there on the air for 19 consecutive hours. But this storm caused a lot of damage there in Mexico Beach and Panama City. Of course, even the Air Force Base there at Tyndall. It just basically like taking a pencil eraser to the area, just wiping out stuff, people's homes and businesses. But what really caught my eye on some of the news feeds I was seeing of the aftermath, it just really struck me is when I started seeing there were some homes that stayed standing. And I know with Julio being a architect, I know there's going to be a lot of architects coming in and studying this storm. Like they did with, Hurricane Ike that hit Texas that you got a good slide of. It was one storm that stayed, it was the only house in that shot that stayed standing, and here there's quite a few still standing. So I'm sure a lot of architects are going to be studying these homes, how they were constructed to be able to withstand 160 mile per hour sustained, and no telling what the gusts were. I remember after Hurricane Harvey hit the Corpus Christi area a couple of years ago, a lot of folks were thrilled that they didn't have any cell phone outages. Everything withstood. That was not the case with Michael, not only in the Mexico City area, but even over in Panama City, west, which is on the side that's normally weaker with the winds. Winds just snapped that cell tower, folded it over in half, and there was quite a few cell towers all throughout that region just like that, and they were without communication on cell phones for months, I believe. So how can I prepare for a tropical cyclone? Well, a few years ago, Dr. Rick Knabb, I think, said it best. He said, when asked by a news media, give me 10 seconds, in 10 seconds, how can I prepare for a hurricane? He said, evacuation, supplies, insurance, and strengthen your home. I don't think they can be said enough. And he also said the idea of education to the general public. And us as ham operators can do just that. Let's touch on the evacuation. People need to find out, especially in coastal areas, do I live in an evacuation zone? If so, find out what your evacuation route is. Because when the time comes to evacuate, you don't want to be caught in that. Because everybody's going to be trying to go in the same direction that you are at the same time. I can only imagine what that'd be like in South Florida, where everybody's trying to get out, and then all of a sudden the storm takes a turn to the north, and he's, oh no, I'm trying to come from the south, go to the north. But then you have people that get impatient. They say, well, that lane's going quicker, so let me jump over in it. The only thing you've done now, you created a hole in the lane you were in. Now somebody's going to want to speed up and jump into it. Before you know it, there's been a wreck created, and it's messed everybody up. Also, find out if you live near a storm shelter. Most cities, I believe, now have tornado shelters. Find out where they are, what their capabilities are. If you need to evacuate to one, find out what their limits are and what their rules and regulations are, because you don't want to have to think, well, I need to go now, only to find out, well, they're already booked up. So when the time comes, you need to know what their capabilities are and what kind of time frame you need to get away. Everyone needs to have an emergency family plan. So in case you do need to evacuate, whether it's for a hurricane, tornado, flooding, for people, say like on the West Coast, has to deal with wildfires, what do I need to do if I need to evacuate? So like keeping on hand cash, traveler's checks, change, copies of your insurance policies if you need to be gone for a length of time, not only your prescriptions, but maybe copies of your prescriptions in case you need to get them refilled somewhere else. Stay informed. Stay tuned to the media. You don't have to be scared of anything, but keep an ear out. If a hurricane is brewing, stay tuned, so you can start preparing your emergency plan. One way with ham radio, if you want to keep up with what's the latest, if you're not able to do so by other means, you can also always tune in on 14300, which is the Maritime Mobile Service Net. At the bottom of each hour, they get out the weather information. For mariners and shortwave listeners, during hurricane season, they also read the tropical weather outlook and any of the latest advisories on any active storms. You can also visit our website, hwn.org. Anytime there's an active storm during up in the middle center of the screen, it lets you know what the name of the active storm is and what basin it's in. You can also sign up to receive via email the latest tropical weather outlooks, as well as any current advisories. You can also check us out on social media on our Facebook page, and hopefully we'll get our YouTube channel kicked off later on this year. And of course, you can also download a family emergency plan as well as an emergency checklist. Of course, I got some of those in your handouts. Speaking of emergency supply list, besides food and water, you may want to have some batteries and flashlights, perhaps a battery powered or hand crank weather radio. You may be seeing that bottom when it says local maps. You may say, wait a minute, Bobby, we're living in the 21st century. Don't you remember? We got cell phones. I got maps on this phone. Remember that cell tower I showed you was folded over? Those maps aren't going to be worth a dime on your cell phone. So actually having a paper copy of your neighborhood will help. Well, you might say, oh, wait a minute. Now, I grew up in this neighborhood. When a Cat 4 or Cat 5 hurricanes come through a neighborhood, like you've already seen, where all your landmarks are gone, I know Julio can tell you, you're not going to find your home because you're looking for this landmark. Well, it's not there. I see there's a street there, but which one is it? Those signs are gone. But if you can ever find a frame of reference, well, you can then know on that map from here, this is where I need to go and make my turns to get to my home, or maybe the places I need to get to. Insurance, make sure you're properly insured. Make sure you have enough coverage on your home, including that of flood insurance. Keep in mind, if you decide there's a major hurricane coming my way, I live in a flood zone. Flood insurance doesn't kick in until after 30 days after you purchased it, so keep that in mind. Strengthen your home. If you're in a hurricane area, work with local builders, maybe some architects to find out what codes we can do to help your home withstand a storm like we saw those that withstood Category 5 winds there in Mexico Beach, Florida. Personal weather stations. Let me touch on this for a short. A lot of folks are getting into having personal weather stations, and I know the meteorologists appreciate that. I know us as for the Hurricane WatchNet appreciate it. But keep in mind there are some standards for weather stations. Of course, you can get them where each piece is separate, like you got the temperature sensor is a separate unit, the anemometer is a separate unit, and so on. Or others are an all-in-one. But your temperature sensor, you want to have it like 4 to 6 feet above the surface. And when I say surface, I'm not talking about that of your roof or over asphalt. I'm talking about over grass or dirt, away from a building. Also, for the anemometer, it should be in an open area, 30 feet up in the air, away from buildings, trees, and what have you. However, you may not be able to do that due to physical limitations of your property or the property surrounding you, or maybe that of homeowners associations. But if you are able to put one up, please don't do this. If you have a gabled-in roof or maybe between two buildings, this is not going to work. There's something known as a Venturi effect. When wind hits a pitched surface, it wants to speed up to get over it. It's like on a wing of an airplane. The way that wing is shaped, air wants to flow over the top faster than it does the bottom, creating a pressure change. And when it does, that anemometer is going to give you a false reading. And the way that one's even set up, you're not going to even know which way the wind is literally blowing. This setup may work if you're only interested in rain, but for temperature, it's being blocked by that fence. You really need to have it where the temperature can flow, otherwise the heat's going to build up in between that fence, and then with that fence and that outbuilding, your anemometer is really not going to give you much good information. So if you do have an all-in-one, what's recommended is anywhere between 6 to 10 feet above the ground, away from buildings and trees. And if you don't have a weather station and you don't know how to judge wind speed, I invite you to again to visit our website, hwn.org. On the left side navigation bar, you'll find a link that says Beaufort Wind Scale. Great information to help you to judge by the way the trees are blowing or how heavy the limbs are rocking, or maybe if they're beginning to snap. The diameter of it will let you know, winds have got to be at least this speed. Other information we need, besides your name, call sign, location, if you're checking in to report your weather, let us know whether it's measured or estimated. Once again, measured is always great. We'll take the estimated data. Wind speed, wind direction, and wind gust. And also let us know the height and location of your anemometer. Barometric pressure. Let us know if you do have a barometer and when the last time it was calibrated. If it's been more than a year, we'll still take that data, but we'll use it more as a reference. And let us know the rainfall, how much over X amount of time, storm surge, and damage, if you can do so with those things safely. We want you to be safe no matter what. So how about in a season B? Let's just always remember, it takes one hurricane to make for a bad season. I always like to close to remind people it doesn't get any worse than 2005. We had 27 named storms and numerous hurricanes, and it seemed like a bunch of them historic. But when it does come to storms, never let your guard down, because by the time you think you have Mother Nature figured out, she will change her mind. These storms can change direction. This was our inaugural storm back in '65, Hurricane Betsy. It first looked like it was going to go out towards the middle of the Atlantic and become, as I've heard some meteorologists call them, a fish storm, just, not bother nobody. But then it curved back down a little bit, come towards it looks like it was heading toward the Bahamas, and it looked like it was going to head up to the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Then it did a 180, come back, southern tip of Florida, then to New Orleans. Does history repeat itself? Maybe not in the same areas, but it will repeat. This was in '85 with a storm named Elena. Came across Cuba, got right in the Gulf of Mexico, and I was in Moss Point, Mississippi that day working on some equipment. And I knew that the storm had made a right hook, heading right towards Tampa. Well, I rushed home. I got home about midnight that night, turned on the TV, trying to figure out, okay, how bad is Tampa getting hit? Only to my surprise to find out they're not getting hit at all. It made a 180-degree turn, came right back towards Gulfport, Mississippi as a Category 3. So bottom line, when it comes to these storms, stay informed, and the time to prepare is now, and never drop your guard. Hurricane preparedness is all about saving lives, and that's the reason we're here today. Thank you very much.